Well, we have a few minutes if anybody wants to jump in and ask a question or two.
I've got a question about kind of a disturbing trend, I guess, I'm noticing as far as criticism is concerned. Well, I mean, time was when some new horror movie is about to open up, and the studio knows that it's not going to get reviews, and so they just don't allow critics to come read it. And most people, they see that there are no reviews ahead of time. They're like, well, that probably sucks, and they don't see it. But recently, like just this summer, I think it was G.I. Joe. They might have done this with Transformers 2 also. They basically had like a rating or a critics embargo where they said, they kind of cherry-picked who they'd like to review it. And those other people, they said, like, if you review this, you will never be invited to another, red carpet event or whatever. And so when G.I. Joe first starts coming out, I mean, I don't know if anybody goes to RottenTomatoes.com, I go all the time. But, up to the Friday of its release, it had like a 95% because you only had Harry Knowles and, all these other wanking jerks who just love, as long as there's big explosions, they're satisfied. And then Friday hits, and the rating just plummets to, 17%. And I'm wondering, what do you think, what does that mean as far as the role of the critic? Does that mean that the studios still fear them and they still have power, or does it show that they're not relevant? Because obviously both of those movies made a bajillion $million despite their incredible crumminess. And so, what does that mean, you think?
To be perfectly honest, I don't care how much a movie makes at the box office. That doesn't affect my job, and that means a lot of people saw it, but I wouldn't say Titanic is the greatest movie of all time. They're separate. And by the same token, I think that in the case of G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe people were expecting to be bad because of other factors that news sites reported on, that the director, Stephen Sommers, had been kicked out of the editing room and other rumors. And my boss actually saw it. He was friends with the producers, and he is not someone that, I don't want to speak ill of Harry Knowles, but he's not someone who's like, if you see this early, you will write positively about it, or you'll never write for us again, because studios are very wary to do that. They don't want to cut off a news source and then lose those readers. But my boss saw it, and he's like, 10-year-old kids will love this movie. And when other people ended up seeing that movie, other people I speak to, they're like, this is like for 10-year-old kids. They'll have a lot of fun with it. Now, does that make a great movie? Maybe, probably not, but that doesn't mean it didn't accomplish its goal. And for me, personally, at least in terms of, does it work or does it not, ignoring themes and things of that nature, G.I. Joe is a success.
Well, I mean, understand, I'm not just trying to criticize G.I. Joe. I'm more talking about the relevance of the critic in the mind in the public zeitgeist or whatever you want. I mean, people went out and saw that movie regardless of the fact that there were very few, critical remarks, and I think they kept going to see the movie.
I think there's movies that are critic-proof. I mean, that's what that is. I mean, there's movies that no matter what the critics say, there's a fixed audience that's going to go. I mean, you could critic-proof. Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, Terminator 2 or Transformers 2 is a good example, right? Like, if the critics could have written, if you see this movie, you'll have a heart attack and die, and people would still line up. In fact, it might help its box office. But there's movies that are critic-proof, and the studios know this. I mean, quite honestly, it's why Tyler Perry doesn't review his movies anymore. His movies are critic-proof. The audience that's going to go see a Tyler Perry movie is going to go see it, whether it gets a 5-star review or a no-star review. So he's like, I'm not going to subject myself to the public flogging. I know I'm going to get killed by the critics. I don't need them. I appeal directly to my audience, and I'm going to make $34 million in the opening weekend, and everybody else can kiss my ass. And that's what he does. He doesn't let the critics see in advance. I think the manipulation is that you're sensing is there's some films that they know they're going to get horrible reviews. They leak and they take advantage of these few people to get a positive review, and then mislead the public that it's actually going to be critically successful.
Can I just say two things real fast? That manipulation has always been there. Sony, I don't know if people remember this, they invented a critic.
For The Animal, or what it wasn't?
Yeah, for The Animal and I believe The Knight's Tale, which is weird because The Knight's Tale is actually a good movie. But also, and there are still critics like, gosh, their names are escaping me right now. but you'll know them. The critics who love every movie. At the end of the year, you'll always see their great blurb, and then their name's really small, and their publication doesn't exist. And then also, the studios do need us, and they need us at the end of the year. They don't, if they think they're like, oh, we don't need them for all these big movies, they'll need us come awards season. Because a film like Amelia and flopped because it wasn't good and no critic liked it. And Fox Searchlight was setting that up to be their big Oscar film. And now you will not see it get probably any awards. And so we still have a role to play, I think, in the balance.
Yeah, I think it's always existed, and blurb wars is the derogatory term we use. And they weren't just movie critics who didn't exist. They are writing for certain large music magazines or on, big entertainment television and, and press junkets. People who take advantage of that. So that's always existed. It does feel like it's perhaps getting a little bit more. Studios are playing their hand a little harder. I don't think it applies a lot to the art house movies, but more to the blockbuster. And and they can shop around because there's so many more outlets now, and nobody's make or break. New York Times, Roger Ebert, Peter Travers. There's nobody who's make or break, and they know that, and they feel less beholden to the critical community.
Well, there's a specific. It's funny. There's a specific audience for whom criticism is make or break, and it's actually a more elite audience that wants the endorsement of the New York Times. So they can make a small movie into a minor hit, and these days when a movie becomes a hit, it's minor. I think the biggest irony of all is that print journalism, they hated the critics for years. They hated the critics, and they wanted more space for their ads, right? So they would buy these banner ads and put fake critic quotes in it because they didn't want the real critics' review to say this movie sucks. And then they would often threaten the papers, which happened a lot. Out there, your critic, give us 1 star. We're going to pull our advertising. Now that the readership's going down, they don't want to buy the full page ads because the readership's so low because they've fired all the critics from the papers. So now the newspapers are sitting there, or the film studios are going, well, hold on, what's happening? And I think this is the irony that they're facing. They've kind of shot themselves in the foot.
Although I will say that because film critics have been around for so long, there's sort of a protection there. And if all the film critics started just writing positive reviews, people would notice. But at the same time, the PR game and sort of this studio game, since it developed really over the last 20 years or so, go to a video game website where they review video games and find a game that's supposed to be a big game of the year and see if it gets less than an 8.0. And it's uncanny, and because those developers will pull ads, and they will not let, if you don't want to play our game, fine, we'll give it to someone else who will. They just have greater control over that market. Now, there are game journalists that are honest, and it's not that these are trying to be dishonest, but I find it very difficult to trust video game reviews.
It's like the whole the Kane and Lynch debacle.
Kane and Lynch debacle, where they fired a guy because he didn't give the review they wanted.